Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vic Kruger, and welcome to the State of the Canadian Oilfield Services Industry and 2015 Outlook. I'm a partner in our corporate recovery practice here in Calgary, and I'll be your moderator. How do I start this now? Could I ask that everybody please put their phones on mute? And because we're going to have a lot of people on this call, we would ask that all questions be emailed to me at vic.kruger, K-R-O-E-G-E-R, @mnp.ca. Otherwise, we may be here way too long answering questions, and we will undertake then to accumulate all the questions and give the answers back to everyone that has participated in this call. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about, firstly, about MNP, then what is oilfield services, where have we been, where are we going, and how should a client manage its company in a challenging market environment. For those of you that are unfamiliar with MNP, we are the 5th largest tax accounting and business advisory services firm in Canada. We provide all similar services as the Big Four. We also have various niches within our firm, depending on the industry, one of which is the oilfield services industry niche. We have offices located throughout all of the major producing areas of the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. We've got over 5,500 oilfield services clients and 150 professionals dedicated to the oilfield services or OFS service line. And we're members of most of the major oilfield services industry associations. We believe we're the only professional services firm that has an on-hand industry specialist, and that'll be David Yeager, who I'll introduce a little bit later on. We have corporate restructuring specialists located in all of the major Canadian centers, with the Alberta-based corporate recovery specialist experience in the major Alberta industries that are energy, which are both oilfield services and exploration and production, real estate, and agriculture. We have over 75 offices from Montreal in the east to Vancouver Island in the west. We are a member of Praxity Global Alliance of Independent Firms that gives us access to practitioners throughout the world. And we have the specialists, the local specialists, to be able to deal with oilfield services clients, again, anywhere in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. Here's just a map showing where our offices are, and at this point now, I would like to introduce David Yeager, who is our National Oilfield Services Industry Niche Leader. David and his father, until 2 years ago, was involved in the oilfield services industry. He has started 3 public companies in the oilfield services industry, has merged and bought 40 companies into those public companies. He has served as the past chair of the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, and he is a writer on this industry and has done so for the past 35 years, and is a media contact for questions about the oilfield services industry. So at this point, I will hand the presentation over to David.
Thank you very much, Victor, and thanks to all of you who are out there and for joining in this afternoon. This is a dynamic presentation in the sense that I started with M&P about 2.5 years ago, and I do an ongoing presentation on what the state of the business is. The general modeling is based on writing about the business for many years, and the work I did as chairman of the Petroleum Services Association. So just from a point of definition, we classify the oilfield service industry as everything the oil company doesn't do itself. So looking at the slide in front of us, an exploration and production company, a light bulb comes on, they want to drill a well. We follow all the companies and services involved to delivering oil, crude oil to the pipeline terminal, natural gas to the distribution facility. And we divide it into 12 main segments. And the point I'm going to make in this presentation, they don't all behave the same. This is not a one-size-fits-all business, and I'll explain more about that as the presentation goes on. The major sectors in the industry, really, again, if you follow the cash in a cycle, you start off at the exploration phase and you go through engineering and construction, et cetera. This is on our website. You can feel it yourself. But this is sort of the cycle for 12. We have 120 subcategories thereunder so that we can provide comparatives and a degree of granularity that no one else does it the way we do it. So where do we get our money in the oil services business? And you'll forgive me for speaking in the first person, but I've been in this business all my life, and my dad was in it, so I still say we. But where the producers or exploration production companies get their money, the primary source of cash for our oil and gas companies is revenue from existing production, which is revenue minus operating costs, royalties, and taxes. And then exploration production capital inflows. Oil companies raise money. There's capital flowing into the business, either through debt issues or equity issues. You can move capital in divisionally. Suncor, for example, can transfer profits from their downstream sector, their refining and marketing, or Imperial, into their upstream sector. And so these are all the sources of cash, and there'll be more explanation of this further down when I go to another slide. So where do we in the service business get our money? Well, the primary driver is exploration and production capital expenditures. And those figures are widely publicized and analyzed by a group of people. There's also E&P operating costs. I've got a slide coming up on that keeping production going is also a major source of revenue, and I'll be elaborating on that. And then the last factor is service industry capex. I don't think people appreciate that as much as they should. For example, TransCanada Pipelines currently has a line under construction from Fort McMurray to Edmonton called the Grand Rapids Line, $2.4 billion. Last year, Precision Drilling spent $900 million or $854 million building new drilling rigs. That goes into the service sector. TransCanada's pipeline order book, if they could ever build every pipe they have in their inventory, would be $46 billion. So all three of these drive it. So here's a summary of revenue for 2014. Remember these numbers. You probably won't be seeing anything this large for some time. But the combined capex of E&P from both conventional and oil sands is $65 billion. I'll be elaborating on that. I put 1/3 of E&P operating costs in here at $15 billion. I picked an average number of $10 billion in OFS capex. Some years it's higher than that. Some years it's lower. We leak revenue under capital expenditures to the Crown through land sales and so on. So it was an $85 billion a year industry. It was last year. And then again, as we go into the estimates for 2015, the reason I'm going to take this, starting on the next slide, this trip down memory lane, is I find it's better to understand what's going to happen in 2015 and 2016 if you know where we've been. So where have we been? This is just the entry slide. For the coming slides, I'll just dive right into it. I'm on the slide on production volumes. So this is the amount of oil and gas we produce every day. Canada is the 5th largest hydrocarbon producing jurisdiction in the world, and that green line at the top, sort of the bright blue marker, is 6.5 million barrels of oil equivalent a day. It's a big business. The four largest producing countries ahead of us, and I think I've got the order correct, would be the United States, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. So at 6.5 million BOE a day, we're the 5th largest. The components thereof, or the purple, is natural gas. On a barrel of oil equivalent basis at 6-to-1, so we're producing 2.8 million BOE a day till about 2006. There was a decline through to 2013 where it picked up again. Conventional oil, this would include East Coast offshore, conventional oil fields, and natural gas liquids. We've been bouncing along at about 2 million barrels a day for some time. There was a downturn starting in 2009, but it started to rise again in 2014 with shale oil drilling. But the elephant in the room and the game changer for the service business, and this will be really important in analyzing this year and next, is oil sands. We were producing 500,000 barrels a day in 1999, rising to just north of 2 million barrels a day in 2014. Because of projects that are currently under construction, we're going to add about 150,000 barrels a day this year and another 150,000 barrels a day next year. Production will rise. That will affect certain components of the service industry. Revenue and cash flow is a good barometer of what to expect. And these figures are not corrected for inflation, but to give you an idea on the growth of the pie, in 1998, the value of all the oil and gas produced in Canada was $26.5 billion. By 2008, due to volume and price increases, it was $145 billion. 2008 is the year that oil hit $140,000 a barrel and gas sold for $10. And I want you to note the red bar on that year is cash flow, $82 billion. Big number. We haven't seen it since, and we may never see it again. There was an enormous correction in 2009, followed by another 5 years of steady growth, where in 2014, the pie hit a current new record of something like $147 billion. But you'll note that cash flow that year was still under $70 billion. So the trend for 2015, and these are based by the roll on ARC's figures, which they update weekly, they're estimating revenue to drop to something like $105 billion. So we're going to lose $40 billion off the top line. But more importantly, they're seeing cash flow heading for something like $34 billion, which is less than half of what it was last year. And just looking across the screen on that red line, again, these aren't corrected for inflation, but the upstream cash flow, the free cash available to spend on whatever, it looks to be the lowest in 13 years. Just a point about how the service industry behaves in that 98 to 2008 period, sort of monodirectional. These are great times for the service business, where basically the ability to do the job it's easy to grow the business. You can see how so many people entered it. Same thing in the period of 2010 to 2014. We had an almost monodirectional upcycle, and that results in decisions that may not stand the test of time when we get into a tough year like the one we're in. The capital expenditures, that $65 billion that you saw earlier is the combination of the blue and the green bar from 2014. Conventional oil and gas, and that includes tight oil and shale gas, has been bouncing around. The 10-year average is something in the just under $35 billion, pretty steady. Again, the elephant in the room is the oil sands, where capital expenditures in 1998 were $2 billion, rising to over $30 billion in 15 years later, sort of monodirectional. What we see in 2015 is we see another correction in conventional, not dissimilar to what we saw in 2009, but we're seeing a significant cutback in oil sands, and I suspect that's going to continue. There is really no order book in the sense that they're going to finish the projects they have underway, like things like SO Curl, CN Horizon expansion, and so on. But behind that, there's not much. So unless something material changes, we can see that dropping again in 2016. So the way I describe this to our clients is what's happened in that 15-year period or 16-year period, 1998 to 2014, is we've created a second parallel service industry to service the oil sands, along with the conventional industry. This is where the strain has come from on the labor market and costs, and will materially affect how the oil service industry as a whole behaves going forward. The gas boom, just a little trip down memory lane. The oil service business, the theme of my presentations last year was how the service business has changed in the last 5 years more than the previous 50. And the period of 2000 to 2008 were the period of high natural gas prices. It was easy to make money. 2005 was Hurricane Katrina, where the value of all the natural gas produced in Canada in 2005 was $52 billion, and by 2012 it had fallen to $12 billion. So we lost $40 billion a year in revenue, and this has resulted in a major retooling of the oil service business as a whole. What happened to the gas business in that period? This is shale gas from the United States, materially changing the North American gas market permanently. For example, right now the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania produces 15 billion cubic feet a day of gas, and Canada only produces 14.5. So the Marcellus Shale in 7 years came from nowhere to producing more gas, the entire country of Canada. Slight uptick in 2014 that we've lost, but those were the days when it was fairly easy to make money. It was characterized by many, many vertical wells for natural gas. The oil sands boom, meanwhile, everybody knows there was a big fuss. You read about the oil sands. We talk about creating jobs across the country. But here's the size of the pie. In 1998, the value of all the bitumen produced was about $3 billion, and last year it was $64. So you can see that what was the fuss about. You can see a 20 times increase in 17 years. This has obviously had a major change on the oil service business and the economy of Canada. Production operating costs, these are a year late, and this is compiled by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, but this is the direct operating expenses that oil companies have to service existing production. This does not include capital. So in 1998, there was $8.3 billion. 15 years later, it was $45 billion. And in 2011 was the first year where oil sands operating costs exceeded conventional for the first time, and that's probably not going to change. So that's why I said earlier in my earlier slide, where do oilfield service companies get their money? I took a third of this revenue and gave it to the oil services business. There's no research done on the granularity of these. Costs would be the input cost, like natural gas for steam or bitumen separation in the oil sands would be in here. None of that would go to the oil service business. Operating facilities, company-operated facilities like Suncor Main Plant and Syncrude would be in here. But so would third-party operating costs from the midstreamers, outfits like AltaGas and Keyera. So I picked the interesting thing about these service companies servicing this market is it is largely immune to the oil price decrease. In the sense there will be some pressure on clients to decrease costs, but in fact nobody's going to be shutting in any production anytime soon. We haven't seen wellhead prices lower than operating costs. So if you are a service company working on the production side of the industry, the odds are pretty good that you are insulated from the downturn. There'll be some pressure on pricing, but your fundamental business will stay the same. Now, reinvestment ratio, I've sourced for all the lines on this slide. The black line is 100%. The thick black line is ARC's estimate of the percentage of cash flow that is reinvested every year. You see the three long arrows pointing at the bottom to 1998, 2009, and late 2014 is when oil prices collapsed. A little mark on 2018 when oil hit $147 a barrel. The royalty trust era from 2000 to 2006. I'll just go through it. So in 1998, the industry reinvested 150% of its cash flow. That was an accident. That was the year of an oil price collapse where oil went $5 a barrel. They didn't plan on spending 150% of their cash flow. It just worked out that way. So when we go back to that gas boom slide, the period of 2000 to 2006, where the royalty trust emerged, this is when the business was fabulously profitable. Oil and gas was cheap to develop. Operating costs were low. Margins were high. So this is where oil companies were able to convert to royalty trusts. They were able to continue to drill aggressively and service their capital with capital outflows. Those ended by legislation in 2006. 2008 was the all-time low, where the cash flow reinvestment was about 65%. That was an embarrassment of riches. Oil hit $147 a barrel that year. Gas was $10. The oil companies just couldn't figure out what to do with their money. But what is interesting in the period, say, 2010 to 2014, was the industry got back spending as much as 135% of its cash flow. This represents significant capital inflows, going back to that earlier slide, from debt offerings, from equity offerings, from transfers from outside the country, for example, Statoil or Chinese National Offshore Oil Company, bringing in funds, again, integrated companies transferring funds from their downstream division to their upstream division. And then in 2015, at this stage, if you take ARC's estimated CapEx and you take their estimated cash flow, we're looking at reinvesting something like 135% of cash flow. I don't know where that 35% is going to come from. What I mean is I don't know who exactly wants to loan the exploration and production sector any more money than they've already borrowed. I don't know who wants to buy shares in these companies. I don't know that foreign multinational companies will be definitely necessarily transferring some money. So I put that as a warning signal out there to people watching the oilfield services sector. We in the service business, we don't much care where the money comes from as long as it shows up. Just warning that the current estimates on reinvestment in this ratio are higher than maybe the commodity prices deserve. So where are we going? Again, a little trip down memory lane. The 2-year period up to November was remarkably stable. This looks like something out of Soviet central planning. If you look at the average price of 97 US, I mean, for oil, this is unprecedented stability in commodity price. And you can see it sort of peaked in June and started to slide, and then the latest I've got down there is about $50 a barrel. But this is the environment into which we've been operating for the last couple of years, and that tends to give confidence to equity investors, confidence to lenders, and a level of complacency to oilfield services managers. So obviously the trade's off the tracks, but you can see the sort of state of mind everyone was in up until the last month or two. Natural gas has been perplexing. A year ago, we see in February when gas averaged $6, we had what they called a polar vortex. I thought it was a cold winter, but apparently they're the same thing. But the price of gas for the 23 months up till recently was $4 a barrel, or $4 a thousand cubic feet US, and now we're on the wrong side of $3 again, and this even though it's in the middle of winter. This is very discouraging. We thought for a while last winter when all the gas storage was drawn down that with storage drawn down that we would be able to see a permanent recovery in the price of gas. But what has actually happened is that associated gas with natural gas liquids, for example, the Montney and the Eagle Ford in South Texas, have brought on a lot of gas, even though they weren't drilling for it. And then, of course, that monster of a reservoir called the Marcellus Shale, they were able to redistill the storage at an astonishing rate. And so if we don't get some material LNG exports out of North America, the price of natural gas is going to stay at these levels for quite some time. This is good for oil sands in the sense it's an input cost, but it's not very good for anybody else. Some selected prices. We live these every day. Here's just a snapshot. I think what's relevant here is pretty well everything's down by half. You notice natural gas where it was a year ago, it's about twice what it was now. And there's the average prices for 2014, so you can see why we're suffering through the devastation that we are. The Canadian prices for Western Canada Select. I remind you, Western Canada Select is Canada's unique bitumen blend. It is a combination of bitumen, about 60% bitumen, 20% synthetic crude, and 20% condensate. So they have to dilute bitumen so it'll go in a pipeline. The actual bitumen component of that is about $35 a barrel. Now, operating costs aren't bad. We're seeing operating costs as low as $10 to $15 a barrel for some of the better SAGD operators. I think Suncor's average is about $30. So nobody's shutting in, but certainly it's not the return on invested capital you would have enjoyed a year ago. The CapEx is, these figures have been out there for a bit, but just a snapshot of where we are year over year is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. They see oil sands down 24%. Again, there's quite a bit of momentum on the existing projects, but my own view is until we see some new projects, this will decline as current construction finishes up. Western Canadian conventional really down with the rig count. So the 4-year summary, we've been bouncing along at about $70 billion a year, off about a third to 46, and the well count down in kind, averaging about 11,000 wells a year, caps at 7,300. That might be optimistic. The Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors had a much more optimistic forecast in November. They've since revised it downwards. They're saying a 43% decline in total well drilled. Average rigs drilling every day, 203, as opposed to averaging about 350 for the last 3 years. That really hurts. That's about 23,000 direct jobs. The fleet utilization, 26%. Rig operating days is really significant. That's rental opportunities. Every time or every day a rig is drilling, there's a myriad of support services, renting them everything from camps to light plants to mud premix tanks to water trucks to well site trailers. So really, rig operating days are rental opportunity days, and they will be declining in line with the number of wells drilled. So the 12 sectors that we look at, and again, they all behave generally differently. Exploration is downside, why you don't have to explore for anything, you're not going to drill for it. The engineering support businesses are already laying off people. This actually, particularly on the major project side for the oil sands, they were letting people go last fall. Construction is building anything, hauling stuff around. We've talked about drilling rigs, wellbore services where the frackers live. They and the downhole tool companies manufacturing multi-stage packer assemblies, rental supply. Manufacturing and fabrication is actually looking not too bad. There's a lot of money being spent on infrastructure. I talked about the Grand Rapids pipeline from Fort McMurray to Edmonton. Fort Saskatchewan, right now with the Northwest Upgrader and a couple of natural gas liquids fractionation plants, has about a $16 billion order book. So actually, there's liquids being produced in areas that didn't used to be liquids. Things like the Montney play and the Duvernay play in Northwest Alberta. So actually spending a lot of money on infrastructure, meaning plants, facilities, transportation, and obviously on the pipeline file. Given the opportunity, if we were to get approval on Northern Gateway, the Trans Mountain expansion, Energy East or Keystone XL, they'd build a lot more stuff too. So that's not too bad. Whereas production is flat, the volumes are going up, the price is down. So this is what I talked about earlier, is this is not a one-size-fits-all downturn. If you're on the production services side, you'll be challenged a bit on price. If you're supporting the manufacture of pipeline facilities and processing infrastructure, you're going to be okay. Whereas, so it's not all the same. Here's just the general areas. So I've talked about this. Production services keep the cash flowing. Pricing is the main challenge. Oil companies are only getting half what they were, so they will be grinding on price, but they're going to have you. Facilities and pipelines, I talked about that expanding with volume. Shale oil drilling will be the first to recover. The shale oil drilling is down. I've got some slides coming up on that, but the second the price of oil goes up, they'll go back to work. Different prospects work at different thresholds. For example, some operators working in sweet spots, and I'm thinking particularly of Tourmaline and Seven Generations, who brag about their operating costs. They claim that they can achieve a double-digit rate of return with liquids at $30 and gas at $3. So again, there are winners and there are losers. So shale oil drilling will come back first. Oil sands sustaining capex. When you analyze the capital expenditures of, say, Suncor, you'll find that half their capital expenditures every year is sustaining, keeping the things going, and the other half is expansion. So there will be continued investment in sustaining capital. I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to say that's half, roughly. $15 billion a year, but oil sands capex for growth is winding down. There are no new projects on the books. A number of projects have been maintained. Several reasons for this. There was an interesting presentation made by TD Securities that I read about the other day. They had 5 main reasons why oil sands capital expenditures are slowing down. One is obviously with shale oil, you've got quicker returns. Secondly is pipelines. Without pipelines, it will cost about 2 to 3 times as much to rail bitumen to the Gulf Coast as it does to ship it by pipe. And so that's not something that you want to depend on. You want to do a 10-year or $10 billion 40-year project on rail. We had 3 oil train derailments in the last week. One at Glenmore, one at Blairmore, one in Northern Ontario, and an explosion in West Virginia. So whether or not we'll be able to run rail cars throughout North America with crude, that's a problem. There is sort of more instant gratification being asked for by investors than long-term projects like the oil sands. And, of course, costs have been really high. The competition of oil sands capex combined with conventional capex have driven labor costs up. So there's lots of reasons why the oil sands are pausing for the moment. What could change? Well, here's some things that would make everybody happy. An LNG project would be great. It was looking very promising for LNG as recently as 5 months ago. The BC government gave them the tax regime they wanted. The problem is the Canadian LNG exporters said that we would like to sell our LNG to Asia based on the world price of oil. Now the customer said, okay, sounds good. The trouble is the world price of oil is down by half. And so this just continues to squeeze those economics. I don't know whether we're going to see that soon. We have the gas. Hopefully something will happen there. Keystone XL, I don't know. I'm in reasonable health. I hope to be alive when that pipeline is constructed. But it just may not even happen when President Obama is in office. What's really interesting, if you look at the capital build, sort of the application for Keystone XL was made in 2008. And if you had looked at the capital investment in the oil sands that followed through the next period, and then at the same time they applied for Northern Gateway, they applied for Trans Mountain and now Energy East. And I think in 2008 or 2009, if you had said in 2015, not one of these projects will even be approved, let alone under construction, I'd have lost that bet. And so that is, that's a real challenge. My own view is we will see a recovery, a meaningful recovery in the second half of this year. I read everything on oil prices. It's confusing, but there's two factors. One is that I think we'll see a little more on the demand side than many think. With the price of oil is down by half, to mop up 500,000 barrels a day globally is 0.5% increase in consumption on 94 million barrels a day. So I believe the oil market's demand side is somewhat elastic. On the supply side, I think you're going to see decline in U.S. shale production, a lot more precipitous in the second half of the year than anyone is admitting. I think they'll combine to a recovery in prices. I'm on the record as saying that. Now, when I say recovery in prices, the number I see for global replacement cost is $80. I think we'll be closer to 80 than we are now. $100 a barrel, we're going to need a supply disruption of some kind. So how does it look today? Producer cash flow is down by half. So now that you know how this thing works, so you can see the CapEx budgets have been reduced. It's a complete reduction in demand for everything except for infrastructure. Pricing pressure is already on. I remember when I ran our company in 2009, our two main clients said, Dave, we love your company. We just like you about 90% as much as we did last year, and basically asked for 10% right off the top. So practically everybody's seeing this. The answer is yes. The question is how, and of course this is all profit. Pricing pressure is underway. Capital markets are contracted. The debt and equity markets, people are pretty well bargain hunting now. And the challenge for those will be over-levered. The challenge when things are good in this business, and I've been doing this, again, this is the only cycle since 2009 where I've been running a company. When things are good, you can generally borrow more money than you ought to. And that's nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. And so the challenges in a market like this, it's the ones that are over-levered that will have the most difficulty getting through this. And whatever your plan was for the last 4 years isn't going to work this year. So just slowly, here's drilling in line. As of a week ago, we had 359 rigs, 43% less than last year and 42% less than 2 years ago. So we talked about a 43% decline in drilling. It's already happening now, and this active drilling rig count in Canada has been declining steadily. Here's the oil rig count in the States. When the oil price started to fall, they proudly said that the U.S. shale oil was impervious to the price decrease. There's no evidence of this. On October the 10th, there were 1,610 rigs drilling for oil. There's just over 1,000 last Friday. And I would suspect you're going to see a similar decline in the States on a week-over-week basis until we see a meaningful turn in the price. You just can't make the decline rates in U.S. shale production. The average decline rate in the first year is 55% in the Bakken and 63% in the Eagle Ford. You've just got to have the hard cash flow to stay in the business. So what should we do? Well, just to run through the advice we're giving our clients, and it's probably the same advice that your clients, if you are in the debt capital markets, is probably what you should do is where do you make your money? It's an astonishing how many people don't know. They don't tear their company apart. We did this at our company. We had job cost templates. We had direct variable costs, direct fixed costs. And we did all those financial reports by station. And so we did everything we could think of to make sure that we had the tools involved. So I think if you're going to go make the case to a lender, that you should be given, a 1 or 2 quarter holiday on principal payments. You better have the story, better have the information. Do you really get it? I think they do now. I mean, I've been using these slides since last fall, but do people really understand how challenging this business environment is or is going to be? And more importantly, in your company, are you communicating with your company? Are you being honest with your staff and your management team and saying, look, we're we're going to have a tough year and we're going to need your help. And then, of course, on the vendor side, are you going down your supply chain? And some people have done that already. Some of the major oil service companies are already going down their supply chain and asking to share the misery being from the customers. Collections, this is an amazing business. Credit checks is really important. I think Vic has stressed this in some of the other presentations we've done. Is we're in an industry where they hate to pay you anyway. I mean, the payment process is really something. You go do the work and then you send an invoice in, and the typical collection is 75 days. And so as producers come off hedges, as their hedge production declines, and so are your clients credit worthy? Because in this market, typically for field services, you might have had a 40% margin in the field, meaning you had to spend 60 cents on the dollar to do the job. It's probably way more than that now. Probably every dollar of collections that you have probably costs you 80 cents or 90 cents. The idea that you're going to lay out 80 or 90 cents today to walk around with a receivable that you may never collect on. So are you really tightening up on your collections process? Don't kid yourself. Are you going to get paid? Are you leaning your wells? This is another tool that people are afraid to use. There's a lean act, 90 days, and I know when I was in the business, we agonized over this. We said, well, if you lean, I'm going to lean your well. If you lean my well, you'll never work for me again. Well, why would I want to work for you? You won't pay me. And so it's just tough love. Financial flexibility. Do you have the numbers? And this is something that amazes me as if and I know in talking to a lot of financial institutions, do you at least have review engagement financial statements? Do you have the tools you need? Do you have internal monthly reports? If you wanted to go refinance your debt, for example, in a high cycle, a lot of people use equipment leasing as opposed to get a bank debt. One of the things you could do is you could take all your leases and go over and make a presentation to a bank and refinance it all if you had the information. If you want to do a deal, if you want to sell your company, if you want to raise money, do you have the quality financial information that you need? Of course, we're happy to help you with that. Risk management, again, is there a credit risk? Are you taking more risk than you should? And more importantly, you really have to be mercenary on the cost side. And this is a problem in oil services that nobody talks about unless you're in it. It's called leakage, and that is theft, plain old fuel theft. I was giving a client seminar in Swift Current, and one of our clients came up and says, "Well, Dave, what do you do about fuel theft?" "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, my guys are stealing fuel. What do you do?" I said, "Well, I got to fire them." And he said, "Well, no, I can't fire them. They're pretty good hands." I said, "No, they're crooks. They're stealing your fuel. How can you say they're pretty good hands?" And, well, what? Have you ever told them they shouldn't steal fuel? So away you go. I mean, this is what you'll get is if you have tight financials. So this is why I say over and over and over again, getting an oil field service company through a market like this, there's no home runs. It's just a series of base hits. So a little less risk, a little faster collection time, a little less leakage, and you can do that. And so just to wrap up, I'm going to turn it back to Vic here. Just in 2009, I was running a company. Our revenues in 2008 were $114 million, and our revenues in 2009 were $82. Our headcount as we exited 2008 was 900. We exited 2009 at 620. I was about 30% of the staff. Our EBITDA in 2008 was $11 million. Our EBITDA in 2009 was $0.8 million. So there's, that's barely a positive cash flow, which is what I define success as. We violated all of our lending covenants, but we had a plan. We knew what we were doing. We had our numbers. We had a good finance group. We cut costs wherever we could. We took pay cuts across the board. So when we went in to see our secured lender, we said, this is our situation. We can't make principal payments for at least 2 quarters. Here's our plan. Here's a set of balance sheets. They looked at it and said, well, we've got a lot of problems. You're not one of them. We've got our forbearance letters, and we soldiered on. And I was asked at a client seminar similar to this, what's your definition of success? And I'd say in a market like this, and I quoted the CEO of Weatherford. Weatherford is one of the top 5 oil service companies in the world. They operate in 100 countries. They let off 5,000 people the week before last. And the CEO of that company, based in Switzerland, said a positive cash flow was their idea of success in 2015. I can't talk any faster. There is the history of the whole world in 35 minutes. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to deal any questions if you have any.
Thank you, David. And when we get on to the questions, please email the questions to me, and we will answer. If the organizing questions coming in online will probably not. It's way above my capability. And as David said, when you're looking at a company, a number of them will have to go through some sort of procedures, whether or not it's an informal procedure like David's company did or a formal procedure. You'll have to take a look at each one individually and say, are they in one of the service lines that's going to recover quickly, or are they in a service line that may not recover for a long time, if ever? So the difference then is what support you can give them, and as well, or should give them, and or if you're in the company itself, is whether or not now is just the time to hang up the keys. Unless you have something else.
Yeah, I would just like to add that I think realistically, and this is why I take all that time to go down 15 years of history, where when I say that you understand the future better if you understand the past, is that I don't see a 100% recovery of the oil service industry in the foreseeable future. So that's why I take all the time to say, well, what is that? Well, that's $65 billion in combined capex for the conventional and the oil sands. Not likely. That was driven by $147 billion a year in revenue and whatever that number was, $72 billion in cash flow. Is that coming? Not unlikely. Not likely. That was built on significant capital inflows, high reinvestment ratios. That's why I took the time to show you that slide, as high as 135% of cash flow. Where's this money going to come from? Not likely. That was driven by simultaneous construction of multiple multi-billion-dollar oil sands projects. Again, that's just not likely. So the oil service business, as we knew it as recently as November, what are we going to see? It's going to be some fraction of that, depending on what comes back and how quickly. But I can see, more likely bigger than 2/3. But if we got an 80% recovery, for example, in a reasonable period of time, that's all I see now, just because that is how precipitous the downturn is going to be. But Vic's absolutely right. I mean, you hate to play God, but I can tell you that their businesses will bounce back a lot sooner than others, and obviously we're here to. That's my job here, is to help internally and externally if anybody needs any information on that.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for your participation. If you have any questions, again, email them to us. And if you have any comments on how we could do this better, if we can do it better, please send those along to me as well. And as well, I want to mention that we have recorded this presentation, and we will be letting you know when it's on our website, in case you want to hear it again or pass it along to any other parties. Thank you very much, and with that, we'll let everybody go.
Have a great day. Thank you.